Have you ever felt exhausted in someone's presence, yet held on, telling yourself they're family? They were once kind to me, or worse, they need me. We are taught that severing ties, especially with family, is selfish. But if you cannot breathe in your own space, is there anything worse than continuing to live under pressure, wounded and racist? Today is not about learning how to walk away. It is about waking up together to a truth. Some relationships must end so that we may remain whole. 1. You are no longer yourself around them. Some relationships erode us quietly, not through overt insults or recognizable abuse, but through subtle pressures that force us to adjust, conceal, and shrink just to stay afloat. We begin to choose our words carefully, hold back what we truly think, and constantly wonder if we're overreacting whenever discomfort arises. One of the clearest signs is the need to brace yourself in their presence. If you've ever felt tense while speaking, compelled to self-censor before voicing anything, that is your inner alarm. When you have to calculate every word, fear their reactions, or feel like you're walking a tightrope, that's not living as yourself. Stoic philosophy does not encourage indulgence, but it calls for integrity, the alignment of speech, thought, and action. When a relationship prevents you from being honest, from expressing your views without fear of judgment or dismissal, you're losing that integrity. You no longer respond with reason, but with apprehension. You no longer live by your values, but under someone else's expectations or control. Another signal is the disappearance of simple joy. In healthy connections, people are free to be themselves, imperfect, eccentric, honest, and comfortably silent. If you feel like you must earn your place in the relationship by always being funny, upbeat, agreeable, you're being conditioned into someone else, no longer yourself. Stoicism teaches that true freedom isn't found in doing whatever we want, but in being unbound by what is not our nature. A worthy relationship draws out what is genuine and noble in you. It does not bury it for the sake of fitting in. When you wear a mask, consciously or just to keep the peace, freedom no longer exists. Losing connection with oneself rarely happens all at once. It's in the little things. When you stay silent instead of speaking truth, force a smile when belittled, pretend to be fine just to avoid conflict. Over time, these moments build into a hollowing sense of self until you no longer recognize who you are in that relationship. The danger isn't that they changed you. It's that you changed yourself to match them without even knowing. Stoicism teaches that we are each accountable to ourselves for how we live, how we respond, and what we choose to hold on to or release. When you are no longer yourself in a relationship, it's not just an interpersonal issue. It's a matter of personal honor. You begin to lose your place in the world, not physically, but morally and spiritually. Another warning sign is the constant inner conflict. When you're always choosing between keeping the peace and speaking your truth, between pleasing and staying principled, your moral boundaries are under siege. These conflicts are not normal. They are your mind's way of warning that your freedom is at risk. In such moments, the Stoic does not act out of impulse, nor chaffer in silence. They face the truth, weigh the impact of the relationship on their ethics, mind, and growth. They assign no blame, harbor no resentment. They simply choose what aligns with their values, even if that means letting go. No relationship is worth the loss of one's natural dignity. No one should live in a way that makes them feel smaller, less worthy, or distorted from who they truly are. Kindness is not submission. Compassion is not the loss of identity. Stoicism does not teach us to be cold. It teaches us to respect ourselves first, and that respect begins with the courage to live truthfully, speak openly, and walk away when we are no longer ourselves. 2. You feel spiritually drained. One of the most recognizable signs of an unhealthy relationship, through the lens of Stoic philosophy, is exhaustion, not of the body, but of the mind. This feeling doesn't strike suddenly. It builds quietly over time. It is the condition in which one finds no joy, no peace, no inspiration after spending time with someone. Instead, there is fatigue, heaviness, and emptiness, as if their presence invisibly siphons away your life force. A Stoic guards inner tranquility as a treasured possession. That mental clarity is the foundation for living with reason, mastering emotion, and acting with moral integrity. But when a relationship keeps your mind in a constant state of alertness, anxiety, or depletion, your ability to remain calm and in control begins to erode. This isn't weakness. It's the natural outcome of placing yourself in an environment that persistently drains your spirit. A clear sign is the emotional and physical decline you experience during interactions. You may feel fine before seeing them, but after the encounter, your mind grows heavy, negative thoughts escalate, and your body slips into lethargy. Even without conflict or harsh words, the feeling of being drained after a conversation reveals a fundamental imbalance in the connection. Stoics emphasize that we should never become victims of another's emotions or behavior. Yet this does not mean enduring silent harm. In the name of resilience, to acknowledge the feeling of being drained is not to be weak. It is to observe honestly whether the relationship still aligns with your ethical and intellectual growth. This fatigue doesn't only come from those who are overtly negative, blameful, or bitter. It also stems from those who require you to constantly uphold the relationship by explaining, comforting, or maintaining harmony. A healthy bond fuels the strength to face the world. In contrast, if every interaction feels like a mental battle, that is a sign the connection has gone astray. From a Stoic view, mental exhaustion is a warning that you're living against your nature, not the external one, but your internal essence of reason and serenity. If a relationship pulls you away from that state, makes you overreact, overthink, or distort your peace, then it is drawing you away from the very core of self-governance. Stoicism honors the defense of your inner fortress, your mind's quiet center. When someone continually disrupts that fortress, they are not a commodity, but a source of disturbance. Another form of depletion is the sense of carrying someone else's emotional weight. You may find yourself solely responsible for managing the emotional tone, preserving balance, or sacrificing your time and energy for the relationship's stability. Over time, this creates asymmetry, where one person is exhausted and the other unchanged. Stoics don't demand perfection, but they do not accept sustained depletion that yields no moral or spiritual value. The drain also reveals itself as a loss of motivation in other areas of life. When a relationship begins to harm your work, sleep, focus, or worldview, it's no longer just a personal issue. It begins to corrode your entire value system. We each possess a finite store of energy each day. If most of it goes towards surviving a relationship, little remains for growth or purpose. To the Stoic, walking away from a toxic bond is not selfish. It is a reordering of priorities. Peace, wisdom, and virtue come first. When a connection consumes too much and offers no respect, encouragement, or harmony in return, stepping away becomes necessary, not as punishment, but as preservation. Ultimately, we must recognize spiritual energy is not infinite. Without timely awareness, we risk sacrificing long-term peace for short-term attachment, to what no longer serves us. Stoicism doesn't ask us to reject emotion, but to discern what disturbs the balance of the soul. And if a relationship is the chief cause of that erosion, then the right action is to adjust or depart in order to restore vitality and reclaim true self-mastery. 3. You are being controlled or manipulated. In any relationship, autonomy is the foundation of respect and maturity. When someone loses the ability to make choices based on their own reason and values, and instead acts according to another's will or expectations, that is a clear sign of control. If this persists, not only actions but also thoughts and emotions become distorted. The individual no longer lives as an independent being, but as a reflection of imposed influence. According to Stoic philosophy, inner freedom is one of the highest values. A person may live under external constraints, yet if their mind remains sovereign, they are still free. Conversely, one might live without visible barriers, but if their will and perception are shaped by another, freedom has already been lost. Control in relationships often begins with small, seemingly reasonable demands. You shouldn't talk to that person. You need to share your password to prove trust. You should stay home tonight instead of seeing your friends. When such requests are accepted without rational resistance, the scope of control inevitably expands. One of the most insidious forms of control is emotional manipulation. Instead of using direct force, the manipulator employs guilt, fear, or obligation to steer behavior. They may exaggerate their hurt to bend your will. They may feign helplessness or say things like, "If you really cared, you wouldn't do that," slowly eroding your boundaries and binding you to duties imposed from without, not born from within. The Stoic is taught that while we cannot control others, we can control our own responses and actions. But when a relationship blurs the line between what you truly feel and what you've been conditioned to feel, that self-governance is compromised. You will begin to doubt yourself. You wonder whether your reactions are too sensitive, whether your sense of injustice is just you overthinking. Manipulation succeeds when the victim begins to distrust their own reason, what the Stoics see as the bedrock of all right action. Another hallmark of control is the erosion of personal boundaries. In a healthy relationship, each person has choices, the right to say no, and the freedom to set limits without emotional penalties. But in a manipulative dynamic, any boundary is framed as selfish. Time alone becomes coldness. Personal interests become neglect, and your no becomes a threat. The person under control eventually learns to abandon themselves, their preferences, their individuality, even their other relationships, to serve the other's approval. This isn't connection. It is dependency disguised as affection. For the Stoics, moral life begins with the distinction between what is within our control and what is not. When a relationship makes you responsible for someone else's emotions, choices, or behaviors, you are carrying a burden that was never yours to bear. Moral responsibility is not about keeping others happy at all costs. It's about remaining upright in your own choices and actions. If you cannot speak the truth or express your views without fear of backlash, you are no longer in a rational environment, something fundamentally opposed to Stoic ideals. Another common form of control is conditional love. Emotional threats disguised as affection. "If you keep doing this, I can't stay with you." Such statements force change not through understanding, but through fear of loss. Real love does not threaten. In a sound relationship, both individuals are free to grow, free to make mistakes, and free to adjust without sacrificing inner liberty. Stoicism does not see walking away from a controlling relationship as failure. It is the act of a rational being who understands that freedom of mind is non-negotiable. Someone who has endured control or manipulation for too long doesn't just lose the right to decide. They lose faith in their own judgment. They begin to live in perpetual self-doubt, disoriented, dependent on another to define their worth. Control does not always appear as shouting or overt force. Sometimes it's a deliberate silence, a disappointed look, or vague words heavy with implication. If unrecognized, this becomes the framework of the relationship, where the controlled gradually accept their role as inevitable. Stoic philosophy reminds us that autonomy is not an abstract ideal, but a practical principle for living. If a relationship threatens that principle, reestablishing boundaries or ending the connection is not emotional reaction. It is a necessary act to restore honor, reason, and inner peace. 4. You are forced to betray your core values. In any ethical system, personal values form the backbone of character and the compass for behavior. In Stoic philosophy, virtues such as integrity, justice, reason, and self-discipline are not abstract ideals. They are guiding principles for every decision in life. When a relationship compels you to abandon or violate these values in the name of stability or to please the other person, that relationship is fundamentally at odds with the Stoic way of life. Being forced to choose between preserving the relationship and preserving your principles is among the most difficult dilemmas. This pressure rarely comes through overt demands. It more often arises from unspoken expectations to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, to yield when ethical boundaries are crossed, or to cover for actions that violate your conscience. The repetition of such moments gradually erodes personal values and ultimately dissolves one's moral identity. In such cases, betrayal does not occur between two people. It occurs between a person and themselves. When someone consents to an act that contradicts their beliefs or turns a blind eye to what they know is wrong, just to keep the relationship intact, they have already surrendered the foundations of their inner life. Stoicism teaches that no one can live a good life apart from virtue. Peace of mind is only possible when thought, word, and deed are aligned with what is right. A common symptom of this inner fracture is the sting of remorse after actions that go against conscience. Those forced to betray their values often experience internal conflict. Outwardly, they may comply with the other's wishes, but inwardly, they feel uneasy, ashamed, or diminished. This is a clear sign of broken internal harmony, what Stoics regard as the essence of a virtuous life. Stoicism does not encourage stubbornness, but it demands fidelity to moral principles. When you lie to avoid conflict, agree with wrong to avoid abandonment, or stay silent before injustice to keep things peaceful, you are choosing external safety over inner stability. Over time, this erodes self-respect and severs your sense of buoyancy. Another danger lies in allowing your values to be replaced by someone else's standards. If you once believed in honesty, but now constantly conceal, twist, or disguise the truth just to maintain harmony, then you've traded inner principles for external acceptance. Stoicism reminds us that the wise live not by emotion or others' opinions, but by reason and their own moral code. Sometimes the betrayal of values takes seemingly harmless forms, laughing at insults, endorsing prejudiced comments, or ignoring injustice simply because the offender is close. But when repeated, these moments distort your moral compass. The relationship, instead of fostering growth and righteousness, becomes the force pulling you off your path. Stoic teaching holds that integrity cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered. A person may lose status, possessions, or reputation, but no one can force them to betray their values unless they can cut. So if a relationship repeatedly compels you to act against your conscience, it is not coercion, it is a trade, sacrificing what is sacred for the illusion of connection. One of the lasting consequences of betraying your values is the loss of self-awareness. You no longer know what you truly believe, or whether your actions are governed by reason or fear. This is a dangerous psychological state that impairs moral clarity and makes future compromises more likely. From the Stoic perspective, preserving one's values is not merely a matter of personal pride. It is the very essence of mental freedom. Only when a person lives in accordance with principle can they truly govern their life. If a relationship undermines that foundation, then reevaluating it is not an emotional reaction, but a rational necessity, an act of respect for one's nature and dignity. 5. You are always the one trying. One of the clearest signs of an imbalanced relationship is when only one person is consistently striving to maintain, mend, and protect the connection. Effort, while essential in any relationship, becomes destructive when it is no longer mutual. When one individual becomes the sole force keeping the relationship alive, while the other remains passive, indifferent, or entitled, the bond shifts from shared commitment to silent burden. Stoic philosophy values reason and harmony in life. A healthy relationship is sustained by reciprocity between two individuals who share responsibility and mutual commitment. When all attempts to improve communication, resolve misunderstandings, build connection, or heal emotional wounds come from only one side, the imbalance in energy and responsibility inevitably wears down one's inner strength. The one who keeps trying grows increasingly isolated, unacknowledged, and eventually exhausted. A common symptom of such imbalance is when one person always initiates conversations, plans meetings, keeps in touch, or reaches out after conflicts, when the other only responds passively or fails to show equal concern. That lack of initiative is no longer a matter of personality. It reflects a lack of genuine care. The Stoic values intentional action and clear purpose. If a behavior is repeated without yielding positive results or appropriate response, it must be examined with objective reason. In many cases, the one holding the relationship together carries a misplaced sense of duty. They believe that if they don't take the initiative, the relationship will collapse. If they're not forgiving, tension will escalate. If they don't listen, the other will never open up. But when responsibility for maintaining the connection falls entirely on one person, it subtly denies the agency and role of the other. This is a form of emotional injustice, where one shoulders the weight meant for two. Stoicism teaches that we can only control our own actions, attitudes, and decisions, not the thoughts or reactions of others. When someone gives their utmost effort, but still cannot effect change in the other, it is not failure, it is the boundary of what can be governed. Continuing to exert one-sided effort is not a rational solution. It is an act that contradicts the very principle of self-governance that Stoicism upholds. Another aspect of being the one who always tries is the recurring sense of never being good enough. That person may constantly self-reflect, believing that if they were more tactful, more patient, more self-sacrificing, perhaps the relationship would improve. But Stoicism draws a clear line between virtuous action and dependency. Blaming oneself unfairly, taking on others' faults, or forcing harmony at the cost of personal values are all signs of surrendering moral integrity, something a Stoic must never condone. In a healthy relationship, one's efforts are not a burden. They are an invitation to mutual growth. Initiative must be met with appreciation, Forgiveness must be paired with transformation. Effort must be reciprocated for there to be a balance of exchange. If that balance is absent, if only one continues striving while the other remains detached, then this is no longer connection, but submission. Stoic thought views relationships as part of nature's order, a space where individuals coexist, support, and evolve together. A relationship holds meaning only when it helps each person live in accordance with reason and moral virtue. If maintaining a connection demands disproportionate time, energy, and peace of mind without meaningful progress, then that relationship hinders more than it nourishes. In such a case, perseverance ceases to be a virtue and becomes a burden. A frequent consequence of always being the one who tries is a profound loneliness within the relationship. Despite the other's presence, you feel empty due to the lack of true connection. Despite conversations, you feel unheard. Despite shared moments, you feel alone. This is solitude in the presence of another, a deeper and more painful form of isolation than physical distance. From the Stoic perspective, when a person has given their best, earnestly and rationally, and still receives no meaningful response, letting go is not failure. It is an act of honesty with oneself, an expression of respect for one's reason, values, and personal dignity. 6. Communication has become a battlefield. Communication is the fundamental bridge in any relationship. When two people can share thoughts, emotions, and opinions honestly while maintaining respect, the relationship has a solid foundation for growth. Conversely, when communication becomes a chain of arguments, misunderstandings, defensiveness, or tense silence, the bond begins to fracture. Each conversation ceases to be an opportunity for connection and becomes a battlefield where both sides are either defending or attacking. In Stoic philosophy, communication is not merely the transfer of information. It is a moral act that reflects one's capacity for reason, self-mastery, and compassion. A person guided by reason seeks to speak truthfully with calmness, without offense or manipulation. However, if the other party lacks the same disposition, dialogue quickly turns into confrontation. When one speaks to resolve and the other speaks to protect ego or win, the relationship has already strayed from equality and reason. A clear sign that communication has become combative is when every conversation devolves into heated dispute. Regardless of the topic, trivial or serious, it escalates into accusations, blame, or raised voices. There is no longer room for genuine listening, only reactive replies, defensive or aggressive. In such moments, dialogue ceases to be a path to understanding and becomes a tool for imposing will or proving superiority. Another signal is the need to mentally prepare before saying something important. When you must weigh every word, fear overreaction, or delay speaking out for fear of being misunderstood, it's a sign the communicative environment is no longer safe. According to Stoicism, a healthy relationship allows for truth to be spoken without injury and heard without hostile reaction. If you cannot do that, fear has replaced connection. Healthy communication demands 3 elements: reason, empathy, and a constructive spirit. When any of these are absent, conversation becomes a process of erosion rather than connection. For instance, if the other constantly attributes bad motives, twists your words, or intentionally misinterprets to gain control, it is manipulation, not goodwill. In such cases, Stoicism does not advise continued combat, but urges rational assessment and action that aligns with virtue and inner peace. Another red flag is when communication revolves solely around negativity. When every discussion begins with complaints, criticism, or blame, the relationship has drifted far from the core of companionship. Your presence is no longer welcomed as support, but used as an outlet for frustration, tension, or dissatisfaction. Over time, this weakens the emotional bond, leaving one partner feeling like an emotional dumping ground rather than an equal. A more subtle form of breakdown is punitive silence. Instead of resolving issues through dialogue, one side chooses prolonged silence, withholds responses, or exhibits coldness to induce guilt or unease. This is psychological manipulation, no less harmful than hurtful speech. Stoicism values clarity and directness in communication. When silence is weaponized for control, the foundation of mutual respect has already eroded. Stoic thought teaches that while we cannot control another's behavior or emotions, we can choose how we respond. If communication consistently leaves you tense, angry, or off balance, the issue is no longer individual incidents. It is a toxic pattern. Each pointless argument, each distorted word, each retaliatory silence slowly chips away at inner tranquility, which the Stoics regard as sacred. A clear consequence of this is the erosion of trust in communication. When you can no longer be sure your words will be heard as intended, or when you avoid important topics because you already anticipate hostility, the relationship ceases to function as a connection. It no longer offers rest and sharing. It becomes a source of emotional harm. Stoicism does not promote avoidance of communication, but it emphasizes that if every effort to engage results in conflict, then what must be questioned is not just how we speak, but the very nature of the relationship. Communication is a tool for building, but when it only produces harm, defensiveness, and sustained tension, what's needed is not more words, but the courage to pause and ask whether this is still a space worthy of your presence. 7. They plant doubt and insecurity within you. One of the most dangerous effects of a toxic relationship is when the other person repeatedly sows self-doubt within you. This doubt extends beyond uncertainty about the relationship. It strikes deeper, undermining your self-worth, judgment, and even your own emotional truth. When this occurs regularly, the relationship no longer supports your spirit. It becomes the very source that weakens your inner foundation. Stoic philosophy upholds clarity of thought and the rational faculty to discern right from wrong. When a person begins to question their ability to reason, even in the most basic matters, they have lost cognitive sovereignty. Doubt is planted subtly, not through direct assault, but through repeated patterns. Furrowed brows when you express emotion, passing remarks about being too sensitive, or the frequent dismissal of your reality with phrases like, "You're imagining things," or "You're overthinking." Over time, you begin to question every feeling that arises within you. When angry, you wonder if your reaction is valid. When sad, you doubt whether it's excessive. When joyful, you feel guilty because the other does not share it. This is the gradual erosion of inner awareness, a condition Stoicism sees as one of the greatest threats to mental stability. A person who no longer trusts their own thoughts and emotions cannot act from reason because their internal compass has been compromised. A clear sign of this manipulation is the growing need to apologize for things you haven't done wrong. You begin to take blame just to keep the peace, even when you feel no guilt. You hesitate to voice your views despite knowing they're just. You suppress your needs for fear of being labeled selfish. This leads to the fading of personal boundaries, essential pillars of ethical living in Stoic thought. When boundaries blur, one can no longer distinguish between personal responsibility and the demands others impose. Insecurity often walks hand in hand with doubt. It's the unnamed anxiety that anything you do may be judged, twisted, or used against you. You live in constant self-monitoring, afraid to disappoint, to misspeak, to be misunderstood. This anxiety is not tied to specific events. It is a persistent state, born from the erosion of safety in both communication and the other's behavior. Those who plant doubt and insecurity need not be cruel or aggressive in words. They may use silence, distance, or emotional withdrawal every time you show strength. They create ambiguity, forcing you to second-guess your words, your actions, your presence. This is covert emotional manipulation, something Stoic thinkers urge us to recognize and confront with reasoned clarity. A common outcome of living in such an environment is the loss of trust in your own intuition. You no longer feel capable of making independent decisions. When faced with important choices, you hesitate, doubt, and seek validation, often from the very person who instilled the insecurity. This dependence strips you of control over your life, a direct violation of the Stoic principle of self-governance. Stoicism does not encourage emotional numbness, but insists that emotions be examined and moderated by reason, not distorted by external influence. When someone is made to doubt their own feelings, they lose the ability to discern right from wrong and cease to act from inner principles. They begin to live in response to others' judgments. This is spiritual dependence, a state Stoicism views as a chief obstacle to moral maturity. Persistent insecurity also erodes personal dignity. You no longer feel worthy of respect, of being heard, or of receiving unconditional affection. You constantly alter your behavior to meet someone else's standards, unaware that those standards may conflict with ethics or truth. The more you adjust yourself to avoid judgment, the further you drift from who you are, not living by reason, but by fear. From the Stoic perspective, intrinsic worth does not come from external validation, but from living in accord with reason, virtue, and personal dignity. When a relationship consistently disturbs your perception, breeds self-doubt, and feeds chronic insecurity, the necessary response is to return inward, to reassess that influence with objectivity, for no one is worth the price of losing faith in oneself, the most essential condition for a life of freedom and purpose. 8. They are the source of drama. One of the clearest signs of an unhealthy relationship is when the other person constantly creates or sustains tension, drama, and instability, regardless of whether the situation truly warrants it. Relationships of this kind leave the mind in a state of constant unrest, ever alert, and frequently weighed down by prolonged negative emotions. Drama doesn't always appear in major conflicts. It often hides in everyday behaviors, exaggerating minor issues, overreacting, shifting focus to irrelevant problems, or manufacturing discomfort to control another's emotions. According to Stoicism, a virtuous life is one governed by reason, order, and moderation. Mental disturbances, especially those beyond our control, must be recognized and managed with discernment. When someone becomes a recurring source of chaos, they don't just disrupt the peace within the relationship, they threaten the inner stillness of their companion. Tranquility is the foundation for clear thought, and when that foundation is constantly shaken, the ability to live rationally begins to erode. A common trait of those who bring drama is their tendency to manufacture crises from everyday situations. A delayed message, a canceled meeting, or a minor disagreement can escalate into outrage, tears, or blame. They may utter sweeping declarations like, "You don't care about me anymore," "I'm always the one at fault," or "No one truly understands me." turning minor differences into emotional warfare. This dynamic often forces the other person into a role of constant crisis management, draining emotional and mental energy just to keep the relationship from collapsing. Stoicism teaches that emotions must not govern reason, but should be examined and tempered by mindful awareness. When someone consistently creates scenes to draw attention, express hurt, or maintain chaos, they are weaponizing emotion. In such relationships, the other person begins to adjust their behavior, not from reason, but from fear of conflict. Gradually, decisions are no longer based on what is right, but on what will keep the peace. This is the sacrifice of honesty for temporary calm, something Stoicism warns against. Another form of drama is the constant emotional whiplash within the relationship. One day, affection, the next coldness, intimacy in one moment, followed by criticism in the next. These cycles make emotional responses unpredictable, keeping the partner in a state of insecurity. Over time, this breeds mental fatigue, clouds objectivity, and diminishes emotional stability. Stoicism emphasizes that what lies beyond our control, such as another's emotions or behavior, should not dictate our inner state. Yet in a relationship defined by perpetual drama, emotional detachment becomes increasingly difficult. When each day brings uncertainty, when even small missteps risk sparking anger or disappointment, the mind is forced into chronic tension. The relationship becomes not a place of refuge or growth, but a source of sustained psychological pressure. Another consequence of being with someone who thrives on drama is the development of self-censorship. They no longer need to exert control directly. Their partner will begin preemptively adjusting to avoid triggering reactions. Small truths go unspoken. Feelings are suppressed for fear of being mocked or dismissed. Tolerance replaces dialogue, and emotional distance grows. Though externally, the two remain together. In such circumstances, Stoicism calls us to act according to reason and personal virtue. When a relationship repeatedly disrupts inner peace, the solution is not continued endurance or reaction, but a sober evaluation of its ethical and spiritual impact. If drama becomes the default mode and open communication brings no progress, stepping away is not an act of abandonment. It is a rational choice to reclaim stability. Stoicism sees peace of mind as the hallmark of a good life. When a relationship persistently undermines that peace through chaos, tension, and emotional extremes, it is no longer a space for growth or moral integrity. Leaving is not a punishment. It is protection of what matters most: one's mental energy and inner autonomy. 9. You are living in illusion, not reality. One of the most dangerous, yet often overlooked signs of an unhealthy relationship is when someone maintains the connection based on hope, fantasy, or idealization, rather than objective reality. They no longer see the relationship as it is, but through the lens of what they wish it to be, or what it once was. This leaves them in a constant state of inner conflict. They feel unmodeled, but cannot clearly explain why. They sense something is misaligned, but lack the clarity to affirm that it is real. In Stoic philosophy, to live in accordance with nature, that is, in alignment with reality, is a core principle. Reality is the only ground upon which human beings can observe and act. When one deliberately ignores what is real to preserve a beautiful image in their mind, they disconnect from truth and drift into illusion. This not only leads to poor choices within the relationship, but also diminishes one's capacity to live rationally and honestly with oneself. A clear sign of illusion is when one continues to invest in a better version of the other person, one that may have existed in the past, or that exists only in the imagination. They cling to past memories, unfulfilled promises, or rare moments of kindness to justify present harm. They tell themselves, he will change, she's just going through a rough patch. Or every relationship has ups and downs. Over time, these justifications grow increasingly detached from what's actually happening day to day. Those living in illusion often deny or downplay clear warning signs. They may be deeply hurt by disrespect, manipulation, or control, but quickly excuse it. He didn't mean it. She's just hot-tempered. He's stressed from work. Such statements stem not from rational compassion, but from refusal to confront reality. Stoic teaching urges us to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be, nor as they feel in moments of weakness. When we choose selective vision, we allow emotion to override reason. Another consequence of living in illusion is personal stagnation. When someone remains in a relationship based on expectation rather than truth, they avoid necessary action. Whether to confront, suggest, or walk away, they stay, they wait, they repeat emotional cycles. This costs time, energy, and the opportunity to grow. Stoicism teaches that right action can only arise from clear, unbiased perception. To delay action when reality signals harm is a failure of rational judgment. A crucial symptom of illusion is the loss of trust in one's own perception. When reality and fantasy collide, the one in illusion often begins to doubt themselves instead of reevaluating the situation. They ask, am I expecting too much? Am I being too sensitive? Is this my fault? These questions do not arise from thoughtful introspection, but from a desire to avoid facing the truth. The Stoic does not turn away from reality, even when it hurts, for only within truth can inner freedom be claimed. A subtler form of illusion is the idealization of the future. One might think, once he gets his career on track, things will change. Or, once she heals from the past, she'll love me differently. Such thoughts are not wrong if grounded in tangible evidence. But when these expectations are built only on repeated assumptions meant to keep hope alive, they become illusions. Stoicism values action in the present, not happiness based on what has yet to materialize. Living in illusion makes one vulnerable to repeated pain. Each time reality surfaces, they feel disappointed, convince themselves to give another chance, and fall into the same pattern. This cycle erodes their moral clarity, weakens self-respect, and deepens dependency on the relationship. They stay not because reality improves, but because they believe things could get better, even as evidence points elsewhere. From a Stoic perspective, returning to reality is a moral act, an expression of honesty with oneself. One cannot live rightly without the courage to see what truly is. To hold on to a relationship based on mental images rather than present value is to defy the Stoic principle of living in accordance with nature. And when a relationship requires you to live in fantasy ways, it is time to pause, face the truth, and ask, what am I really protecting? Genuine love, or just its shadow? 10. You always feel guilty for wanting to leave. The guilt of wanting to leave a relationship, be it with a friend, a lover, or a family member, is one of the most powerful psychological barriers that keeps people in connections that are no longer healthy. This guilt often doesn't stem from any wrongdoing, but from a belief, shaped through interaction, that letting go is a form of betrayal, ingratitude, or selfishness. Stoic philosophy teaches that we should act based on reason and virtue, not emotion. Yet when guilt takes control, one's ability to evaluate objectively is compromised. Rather than assessing whether the relationship contributes to a virtuous life, the mind becomes preoccupied with the emotional aftermath of leaving, especially the fear of hurting, disappointing, or isolating the other person. A clear symptom of this state is prolonged internal conflict. A person may have repeatedly asked themselves whether they should leave, may have recognized the emotional harm, but still refrain from acting, gripped by thoughts like, "They won't survive without me. I owe them too much," or "Leaving now would be heartless." These thoughts, though born of compassion, keep one from living in alignment with their inner values, something Stoicism considers the highest form of ethical life. Guilt is often fueled by cultural beliefs and societal expectations. Many grow up with the idea that family bonds are unbreakable, that long-term friends should not be abandoned, that true love must endure and overcome. When a relationship becomes harmful, one not only faces personal hurt, but also the burden of defying collective norms. This often leads them to blame themselves, instead of rationally evaluating the relationship's health. Another form of guilt is the belief that one didn't try hard enough. The person revisits every word and action, wondering whether they could have done more. They tell themselves that if they had been more patient, more understanding, more loving, things might have been different. But Stoicism draws a sharp line between noble effort and unnecessary suffering. If one has acted with reason and virtue throughout, then staying out of guilt for not being good enough is simply a way of avoiding reality. Guilt can also be triggered by the other party. In some relationships, the other person uses language, emotion, or circumstance to make you feel that leaving is cruel. They may say things like, "I can't live without you. After all this, you'd just leave me." Or, "If you go, you never loved me." Such words deepen the guilt, transforming a rational decision into what feels like a moral failure. Yet for the Stoic, morality lies not in pleasing others, but in acting in accordance with reason and self-respect. A long-term consequence of living in guilt over wanting to leave is the loss of self. The person remains torn. Staying brings harm. Leaving brings torment. Their mind becomes too clouded to recognize that a virtuous relationship never makes one feel guilty simply for seeking peace. In the Stoic worldview, choosing to leave what is harmful is not an escape from duty. It is a moral act to preserve balance and personal integrity. Leaving, when the moment is right, is the act of someone who has listened to reason and accepted that no change can come from effort alone. Guilt must not stand between a person and their inner freedom. Stoicism teaches that while we cannot control others' emotions, we are responsible for our own integrity. If a relationship causes us to compromise our principles or hinders our moral development, then leaving is not betrayal. It is courage and honesty in action. Guilt is only justified when we violate what is right. But if a decision is made with clarity, guided by reason, and intended to safeguard dignity, there is no wrongdoing to confess. Loyalty to one's values must not be sacrificed to momentary emotion, and compassion should never require abandoning oneself to preserve something that no longer serves truth. From a Stoic standpoint, overcoming guilt in order to act rationally is a moral advancement. Only when one is clear-eyed enough to distinguish between real responsibility and emotional bondage can they act, not out of fear or shame, but from the certainty of what is needed to live a life of clarity and sovereignty. 11. You have lost your tranquility. In Stoic philosophy, inner tranquility is one of the highest aims of a virtuous life. It is not a passive state or a withdrawal from the world, but a deep inner steadiness where one faces all circumstances with reason, remains unshaken by emotional turbulence, and is not dependent on what lies beyond their control. When a relationship consistently provokes anxiety, restlessness, prolonged tension, or emotional reactions that surpass the boundaries of reason, it is a clear sign that tranquility has been lost. A healthy relationship is not necessarily free of conflict, but it should never be a constant source of mental disturbance. When every meeting, conversation, or message from the other person is accompanied by unease, worry, or apprehension, the relationship is undermining your capacity for inner steadiness, the very foundation of a life guided by reason and virtue. A common sign of lost tranquility is a mind constantly in a state of readiness to react. The person is no longer able to relax, even in the absence of conflict. They feel as if they are waiting for the next blow, a complaint, an outburst, a cold glance, or an unreasonable demand. Tranquility, the mental space where reason is nourished, has been replaced by vigilance and fatigue. Stoicism does not treat peace as a luxury, but as the natural result of living in accordance with virtue. A person with a well-ordered inner life does not allow external events to excessively disturb their emotions. However, in a relationship that repeatedly produces tension, anger, confusion, or despair, maintaining calm becomes increasingly unsustainable. Even if one initially responds with reason, persistent disruption without positive change wears down the capacity to remain rational over time. Another clear indicator is chronic exhaustion, not caused by work or external pressures, but by the relationship itself. The person feels depleted after each interaction, needing significant time to recover emotionally. They may experience insomnia, diminished focus, a loss of vitality, or indecision over even simple matters. These are symptoms of a system overwhelmed, often rooted in the strain of maintaining a connection that contradicts the need for inner peace. It is important to distinguish between temporary hardship and prolonged disturbance. Every relationship encounters moments of disagreement, misunderstanding, or emotional strain. But when these states become the new normal, when each day is shadowed by tension and unresolved conflict, the relationship is no longer compatible with a life of reason and self-possession. Stoicism teaches that the goal is not to escape difficulty, but to recognize when it threatens what is most essential. And tranquility is among those essentials. A subtler form of lost tranquility is the suppression of truth in order to maintain harmony. The person avoids speaking their mind, refrains from reacting to harm, or pretends to be fine to prevent conflict, playing the role of being okay, while inner chaos brews creates a split between emotion and action. What Stoics consider a mark of imbalance. True tranquility can only arise when one lives in alignment with values, emotions, and reason, not in concealment or pretense. The loss of tranquility also impairs the ability to practice moral virtues such as patience, tolerance, composure, and reasoned kindness. Without inner space to regenerate, one becomes reactive, judgmental, or driven to behave in ways that betray their own principles. Stoicism considers this among the gravest outcomes, for it disrupts the pursuit of a life governed by wisdom and ethical clarity. Evaluating a relationship should not be based solely on shared history, memories, or surface attachment, but on the real impact it has on your inner life. If someone's presence consistently disrupts your mental stability, if your thoughts become tangled, your heart uneasy, and your calmness elusive, it signals that the relationship no longer serves a rational and virtuous path. From the Stoic perspective, the decision to stay or leave must be grounded in reason, not fleeting emotion. And when a relationship costs you your inner tranquility, the foundation of a virtuous life, the right action is not to endure, but to courageously recalibrate and return to a life of balance, clarity, and peace from within. Practicing Stoicism in relationships does not mean becoming cold or cutting ties with anything that feels uncomfortable. What matters most, in my experience, is learning to face reality as it is, without sugarcoating, without excuse, and without baseless hope, and making decisions rooted in reason rather than manipulated emotion. I once maintained a relationship out of a sense of debt and loyalty, even though every encounter left me feeling uneasy. When I began applying Stoic thinking, I asked myself what seemed like a simple question. Is this relationship helping me live according to my values, or is it pulling me away from them? The answer forced me to confront a hard truth. I was trading away my tranquility to preserve something that once had meaning, but no longer aligned with my path. We cannot control others, but we can control what we allow, who we allow near, what we allow to repeat, and what we allow ourselves to lose. All of these are choices. And in Stoicism, the bravest choice is not staying out of pity, but leaving to preserve peace and dignity. Not everyone who enters our life is meant to walk with us to the end. Some relationships arrive to teach us lessons, others to reflect what we must change. And sometimes the most courageous act is not to hold on, but to let go at the right moment. If this reflection has resonated with you in any way, consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications to follow along this journey toward living with greater reason, self-mastery, and depth. Because in the end, peace is not found in what we cling to, but in what we are brave enough to release. Keep your mind still and live true to who you are. See you in the next video.